Okay, let's get started. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. There's a little toggle that says to everyone as opposed to just hosts and panelists. But I'm really excited to be with you all today. I love, one of my favorite things all month routinely is reading all the things that make people happy as they come in. So a couple of things to shout out before we get started. Hallie at the College of Worcester is watching her sister play on the boys soccer team tonight, so good luck to her. Alice in Camden hanging out with her cat. Rachel in Indiana at the Henry Ford Museum is hanging out with their new office kitten, and the kitten's name is Henry Ford, so that's pretty great. Ryan in Des Moines is welcoming a whole bunch of students back to his high school, and so I hadn't realized that school was already started for some, so 1,400 folks will be hanging out with Ryan. That's really excited. Laura and other Texans talked about how great having the rain is. Giselle in Ontario talked about how great waking up to sunrise on the lake has been. So that's envy of you, Giselle. Catherine at the Northwest Mother's Milk Bank got a surprise $35,000 donor advised fund gift. I'm really excited for you, Catherine. Sharon is a new great aunt out in Maricopa. So congratulations, Sharon. Lynn's just having a great morning run in Tucson, where I imagine the morning part of that is really crucial, and your afternoon runs are a little bit tougher. Patricia's going to the Dodgers-Brewers game tonight. Let's see who, I think maybe we'll be rooting for the Brewers, but I assume Patricia's rooting for the Dodgers out west. And then Pat had her, from Marianal Lay Missionaries, her grandson walked for the first time today. So really, really exciting. Also, Pat, just so you know, my mom is a frequent donor to Marianal Lay Missionaries, and I think I have made some Christmas or birthday presents to you all in her honor. So nice to see you here, and glad you're here. So let's dive in. We're going to talk about some of the science behind giving days and the strategies behind it and why they may or may not be a good idea. And we'll really talk about a couple of big events throughout the year. A lot of focus on Giving Tuesday. And then it's important to note that we're not really going to talk about your own special giving days that much, call it your May class day or things like that. But a lot of these attributes are going to be really applicable for that. So if you have your own giving days throughout the year, it would be a great time to sort of use the chat and share what you're doing and any tips you have. Obviously, we've done a lot of research. We put a lot of hard work into this. But you all collectively are a lot smarter than we are, and so would love to hear about your experience throughout the day. Couple of housekeeping notes before I get started. This one is also approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. We will drop a link to the survey at the end of the chat, and so please do that. All right, here's the agenda. I won't read it out loud. The important thing to note at the bottom is that we will send you the slides and the recording after the fact. Regardless of me telling you this, some people will ask throughout the program. And so in the chat, you can just remind folks that yes, it will all be sent out later today. Okay, so very quick intros. My name is Patrick, here with my co-founder, Jenny. Forgot to mention that maybe the thing that made me happiest over the past 2 weeks is actually just got back from Italy. And I went to a wedding of one of my dear friends and colleagues, a former FreeWill colleague and a longtime dear friend. And also his wife is my friend. And so we spent some time in Tuscany and watched folks get married against a Tuscan backdrop. And it was totally beautiful. It also means I'm a little jet lagged. So if I get any facts wrong, just feel free to correct me in the chat and we'll go from there. Really lucky to work alongside the whole FreeWill team, which has recently crossed $6 billion, which is sort of astounding in total money committed and generated for charity, more than 200 folks, and some of y'all are listening from the FreeWill team, and so just a big shout out to all the hard work that you guys are doing on behalf of everybody else who's listening and all of our partners and nonprofits that we get to support. Okay, last housekeeping thing before we get rolling. One thing we really like to do on these is just, we're so grateful that you're here and you're joining us for half an hour, an hour of your day and really pushing yourself. And so we love to give away some of our favorite books. And this week, we are going to give away 20 copies of a book called Getting More of What You Want by Margaret Neal. And this is a book on negotiations It is a friendly, easily accessible book on negotiations, including why a lot of negotiations are not zero-sum as are commonly assumed. And I wanted to do this because, obviously there's actually some negotiation with a lot of your top giving prospects, right? Also internally, as you think about different ways to sort of survive in the workforce, in your relationships, in your friendships, in your marriages, if you're married, all these things come to play. And so it's a really sort of thoughtful book. And one of the things that, sort of the most striking thing I learned when I was in grad school, I was in grad school at Stanford for 2 years, lucky to be there. And one of my professors had done a 40-year longitudinal study of graduates of Stanford's business school. And what he really wanted to say is like, what actually drives both monetary outcomes, but also overall happiness? And there were only two factors. He looked at hundreds of factors. Only two things really mattered. One was, or sort of highly correlated, right? One was, how many close relationships did you have in school, which is probably a proxy for how many close relationships you have outside of school. And the second one was actually, did you take negotiations? And the folks who had taken a negotiations class were just decidedly better off in almost all aspects of life. And so this book is by one of the Stanford professors. It's really a distillation of some of the best learnings. So highly recommend. We'll give away 20 if you don't get it, available at your favorite bookstore. And just make a note and please add your address so we can actually send it to you. Okay, so let's talk about how your week is going. You see some sort of slight shifts downwards in happiness, nothing too big to report. It seems like a pretty constant summer after a really low point end of July. For those of you that remember, that was right after the Uvalde shooting, and so understandably so. And also, one of the really nice things to see is a sort of re-uptick in terms of how people are feeling about hitting their goals this year. And so hopefully a lot of the things that we've been talking about over the last 6 months, we're starting to put this into practice. We're starting to shift some of the behavior of our donors, of ourselves, and starting to see better outcomes across the board. So that's great to see. Let's dive in on giving days. So we asked you what giving days you participate in, and some of these are weeks or months, and so I'll just own that going forward. Giving Tuesday, super high participation, really outstanding given how new this is. Make a Will month, 20% of you are already participating in this. This is massively on the rise. NEPAW, which we'll talk about, it's a week in October, also around estate planning, 15%. Stock Monday, which is a very new event, already 8% of you, and we're seeing that really go up, so that's super exciting. We'll talk a lot about Stock Monday, obviously year end and other days as well. So very cool. Marcy says, didn't know there was a Make a Will month. We are going to talk about it, and it's right now. We also asked if you had your own organizational giving days, and a little bit more than a quarter of you said yes. A bunch of you said no as well. We asked, when you have these giving days, what do you really focus on? And you see a lot of folks pushing cash, small donor cash, major cash. And then you also see, really we're seeing more and more focus on some of these non-cash options that tend to be much larger gifts. So qualified charitable distributions. We're not going to talk a lot about those today, but those are gifts from folks over 70 out of their IRA. Hugely popular, one of the fastest growing giving types in the country. Donor advised funds, obviously, bequest stocks, crypto, and then a bunch of you said, it depends on the day. So good things to see there. So let's talk about some big giving days. There are a few big ones that we're really going to chat about here. First one's not a day, it's a month. Full month of August. We're in the midst of Make a Will month. This was something that I was skeptical about when our team brought it to me, and I turned out to be super wrong. It's one of the most effective fundraising events in modern history. We'll talk about that. National Estate Planning Awareness Week. This is in October. We'll chat about that. Stock Monday, which is really paired with Giving Tuesday. That we'll dive in there. We've got some really interesting statistics there. And then year end, December 30th, 31st, we can really treat as its own sort of two-part giving day. This obviously has hugely meaningful for a lot of you. So first, we'll talk about August because it's happening right now. The entire month of August has been christened Make a Will month, and it's one of the most important events for driving legacy gifts. Now, we won't talk about this today because we do it frequently, but legacy gifts are going to be one of the driving forces in modern philanthropy over the next 10 to 12 years as we really are shifting into this great wealth transfer. Great wealth transfer is the $70 trillion that the baby boomers will pass on over the next 20 years. as that generation ages. And we're looking at literally $10 trillion of that going into philanthropy. 70% of Americans don't have an up-to-date estate plan, which is why this is really important. And so what's actually, getting people off the sidelines, getting them to make estate plans, and then making planned gifts? Well, they need a good reason to make a will, but they also need urgency. When we were doing a bunch of our original research in grad school, and we're asking people, why don't you have an estate plan? They said things like, I'll make it next year, but I think I said that last year. And continuously, we just needed people to get a good, swift kick in the pants to really make it happen. It also really helps on something like this to have social proof, right? The idea that everyone else is doing it at the same time. So last August, Make a Will Month, we helped nonprofits raise $445 million in legacy commitments. 30,000 Americans made their wills. This year, we're already seeing about a little under 14,000 wills made, 7,300 different planned gifts, which is sort of jaw-dropping, right? This is amazing. More than 374 million in bequests committed. These stats are a couple of days old, so maybe we'll pass that $500 million mark on Make a Will Month, and that's it's pretty exciting. We're starting to see this sort of up and up and up every year, so we expect next year to be even larger. Similarly, there is a week in October. It's the third week of October, the 17th to the 23rd this year, called National Estate Planning Awareness Week. And members of Congress made this in 2008 because they saw how important it was to help the public understand why estate planning is really important and a vital component of financial wellness. This, by the way, tends to be particularly true in minority communities, where some of these stats are even worse, partly due to lack of access to legal services. This captures legacy interest before the holidays, so it's a really good final push on legacy giving before your sort of small dollar and major gifts take over. And this 1 week, right, this sort of time-sensitive framing drives engagement. We'll chat more about the science there, but there's some really interesting things there. Great follow-up to Make a Will Month. It really sweeps up all the folks that thought about it in August, but didn't necessarily do so. Let's talk a little bit about Giving Tuesday. So first Tuesday after Thanksgiving in the United States. This year it will be November 29th. So sometimes it ends up the very beginning of December, sometimes it ends up the very end of November. I think, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I think Thanksgiving tends to be the third Thursday every year in the US. So let me know if that's wrong. This would basically make it the first Tuesday after the third Thursday, one of the biggest giving days of the year. So it's easy to forget that we are only on the 10-year anniversary of Giving Tuesday, right? If we had had this conversation in 2009, we would not have been discussing this at all. It was founded by New York's 92nd Street Y in partnership with the UN Foundation. It is a global event. Giving Tuesday became an independent 501c3 only 3 years ago, right? So think about how quickly this has taken hold. But in 2021, Giving Tuesday moved $2.7 billion in the US into nonprofit gifts. We'll dig in a lot more on that, but just really sort of, hats off to the folks at Giving Tuesday. And it shows how quickly these giving days take root. Monday before Giving Tuesday is often thought of as Stock Monday. This is newer. This year it'll be November 28th. And what it focuses on is donating, appreciating stock, right? It really uses the thoughtfulness around Giving Tuesday to highlight different ways of giving. And why is it so important that we're shifting people away from cash into stock? Well, the research shows, and some of the most important research in modern philanthropy shows that organizations that focus on appreciated assets literally grow 5 times faster on average than those that take only cash. These gifts, the reason why is not that they get more gifts, it's that stock gifts are on average 100 times larger than a cash gift. So if you can just move a couple of your donors from from cash to stock, that's like adding 500, 1,000 new donors every year. And it's really sort of jaw-dropping the difference this makes. We'll talk more about Stock Monday in a bit. And then giving days, we think about December 30, 31st. These are really the biggest giving days of the year. They're driven by urgency. It's the last chance to give. It's by midnight tonight. Everybody knows the year is ending, right? There's obviously some key tax deadlines here. So for all of those folks giving for tax reasons, 30% of annual donation volume happens between Giving Tuesday and December 31st. So huge pushes here. On Giving Tuesday, at end of year, you basically see twice as high conversion rate on things like fundraising emails compared to any other day on average. And other things like people are just looking to give, right? So the active interest in giving happens around this time. You mostly know that these dates exist. They're really important. And let's dive into a little bit more of understanding why they work. The first one is that time-sensitive giving is extremely effective. So giving days, whether it's Giving Tuesday, end of year. By the way, in our slides, we're going to use EOY a lot. That just means end of year giving. Make a Will Month, MOM, as we call it internally. They're all boosted by a couple of things, right? A little bit of focus on giving. Hey, we're all putting special attention on philanthropy right now. 2, time sensitivity. We're going to dive into the science here in a second. An increased sense of urgency that by deadlines that improves motivation, right? Giving days set achievable goals, which increase motivation, and then they hit the motivation sweet spot. So let's talk about what that motivation sweet spot is. There is something, we talk a lot about stress in modern society, and stress is almost always seen as a bad thing, right? We always sort of chat about too much stress. How do you reduce stress? There's not a lot of books on how you increase stress, right? That's just not a genre of self-help books. But psychologists will talk about something called good stress. It's called eustress, which is a type of stress we feel when we are excited or mentally aroused. The appropriate amount of stress can increase productivity and performance, and it basically increases the efficiency and competency and an action-taking imperative of somebody. There's something known as the Yerkes-Dodson law. It states that the more mental arousal or stress, the more efficient a person becomes, but after a certain threshold, your performance begins to decrease. So let's take a look at this. Simple task, a little bit more excitement, a little bit time pressure, really heightened senses. And so, there's a bunch of elements here, the old-fashioned like fight or flight tendencies, just general sharpness around a potential threat or opportunity or something else that might improve your chance at, evolving, procreating as a species, all these things, right? So this all happens. On a difficult task, there's an element here, and then at some point there's too much stress. So this, I think, is our 60th webinar or something that we started out the first week of pandemic. And at the time, I was wearing a device called a Whoop, which is sort of like a Fitbit. And I realized at the end of our first webinar ever that my Whoop, which is, again, like a Fitbit, detected an hour of running because my heartbeat was going so fast. It was the first time we had done this. I was very nervous. And my guess is that it sort of didn't go as well as it could have because I was so nervous. In a moment like this, a little bit more comfortable, but still, feeling a little bit of pressure with all these folks and wanting to do a really good job for you all, sort of in that eustress moment where it's actually, hopefully a lot better than it would be if I was just totally relaxed and feeling like, maybe talking to one person or dress rehearsing just to my. So you start to see this. As fundraisers, we really have to be shifting folks up that line, right? We need to be creating a little bit of that excitement, that mental arousal. That's the thing that's going to get people not, most people aren't saying, I'm going to give or not, right? We're mostly dealing with lethargy and friction and inaction as opposed to outright refusal. So we really need to sort of help turn up the dial there. The perfect amount of stress is ideal for a couple types of projects, right? So challenging tasks, often, big problems to solve require low levels of stress. They're often arousing on their own. Moderate tasks require more, and then easier tasks actually require a high level of stress to make sure that people are deeply engaged. Giving days inherent deadlines increases mental arousal, increases performance, which in this case is actually just taking the action to give. There's some good sources when we send around the deck if you're interested in reading more of the peer-reviewed research behind this. But in 2018, just to highlight one study, there were different groups given the same survey, and one group was actually given less time than the other. And you might think, well, definitionally, the people giving more time will almost certainly be more likely to find time to do it. And yet it turns out that the more urgency actually increased participation as opposed to decreased. In another study, researchers found that people were more motivated to complete a task on short notice than a longer one, even at their own expense. And so that's a real shift. It's really interesting to see. Social proof is the other component alongside with urgency. People want to behave in ways that are like their peers. Everybody's on the same page, working towards the same goal. We have an inherent need to be part of the social contract. And so the more that I know that everybody else is doing this thing, the much more likely I am to vote, to take action. Research shows that the interest in leaving a bequest increases, for instance, by 15% when donors believe they're one of many supporters doing the same. This is also why many giving days have hashtags associated with them. Giving Tuesday, Make a Will Month, etc. Now we're about to go into election season, and you'll start to see this when you look at particularly pieces of mail or phone calls or text messages that are trying to remind you to vote. You take a look at those and see what language they're in, see what sort of language they're using. And what you'll see is that the best way that science has showed us to get people to vote is saying, hey, we're expecting huge turnout, but it could be really close. So go vote. And that huge turnout means all of your neighbors are voting. And that's going to make me more likely to vote, right? You might think, wow, huge turnout actually decreases the power of my vote. If I know that only 5 people are voting, the power of my vote is really big. If I know that 100,000 people are voting, probably not going to make a difference. And yet the research shows that the 100,000, even though economically my vote is less important, is going to increase my likelihood of voting. And so you're start to notice this in the messages that you're getting as well. This is why sales, by the way, at a retail outlet, at a car dealership, are always limited time only. Not because sort of magically they don't want your business next month, but they know that if they put some stress there, you're much more likely to actually make the purchase. Okay, so Giving Tuesday, as we mentioned, more than 2.7 billion. But check this out, it's a 9% increase through 2020. And remember, giving was way up in parts of 2020, 37% increase in 2019. Now, these trends are important because they signify what's likely to happen in the future as well. We should see an even bigger growth in 2022. More than 35 million adults participated in the United States. This is a 6% increase from 2020. I mean, that's outstanding, right? They're sort of the biggest sporting events in America outside the Super Bowl don't get this sort of participation. Very, very little besides things like presidential elections get this level of national participation. And yet we're seeing Giving Tuesday really take off. 37% of Americans said they're familiar with Giving Tuesday, which is pretty impressive. And then check this out. So campaigns run at the same time with Giving Tuesday, and the name raised 3 times more on Giving Tuesday than those without, right? And so you start to see some of the power of these giving days, right? Same person receiving an email about the same cause, asked to be donated the same way, is 3 times more likely to give if we have that Giving Tuesday element. And that's the urgency and the social proof. So keep thinking about that as we start to plan out some more of our year. The other thing we're seeing is that it's harder to give for the first time than it is repeatedly, right? You're sort of, once you've already made the first step to be a donor, it's easier to make that second gift. And so the eustress from Giving Tuesday helps capture new donors in a really interesting way. Twice as many, by the way, as this end of year. We'll talk about that in a second. More than a disaster relief day, more than a typical day. There may be a package coming, so ignore that phone going off in the back. This matters because donors acquired on Giving Tuesday are more likely to give again than those acquired on a typical day. So this is a really big moment for us to generate new donors. And you might think, wow, we raised $100,000 from new donors. That's probably a lifetime value of $500,000 or $1 million. So really good moment for you to engage here. You can see here in terms of average new donors, I think that is from Classy, so thanks Classy. You remember in May of 2020, there was Giving Tuesday Now in response to the pandemic, but look at how big that number of 3% of the whole year's donors happen on Giving Tuesday. And then you can probably see a bunch more at the end of the year as well. So Giving Tuesday is huge, but end of year giving still outstrips everything else. Month of December has an enormous percentage of overall giving, 21% in 2021. Why is this happening? These reasons will be familiar to most of you. Donations must be made on midnight by December 31st to be eligible for tax deductions. Plus, we have long-standing traditions, especially in the United States, around this end of year giving. And we're seeing these conversion rates that are just twice as high, right? So the email that you send on New Year's Eve is going to be the most effective email you send all year. But how do we think about these things separately? End of year giving versus Giving Tuesday. So Giving Tuesday is going to be better than end of year for new donors. A higher percentage of these donors are going to be new. And then you're going to have a larger activation of existing donors at end of year. Now, both days will have both of these. But if you put your own, sort of put yourself in your own shoes at end of year, it's less exclusively focused on giving than Giving Tuesday. Around Giving Tuesday, there will be tons of news articles and a lot of attention here. But also, it's you're making New Year's plans. Many of you will have just wrapped up Christmas or other celebrations. There's a lot going on. Maybe you're on family holiday. And so there's less mental attention, but there's still a lot of activation happening at end of year. So what we think about that, when we think about that behavior change, it needs to start well before end of year giving, because end of year is going to be less, please teach me new things about giving, which Giving Tuesday is very good for, and more, okay, shut up and take my money, right? Which is fine, but it means that if we're going to try to shift some of this giving into larger gift sizes, that has to happen a little bit earlier. You can see here in December giving how remarkable it was. A couple of those big dates, those sort of big early spikes are Giving Tuesday. Those big late spikes are end of year. The other thing we're seeing as a challenge for this is there is a lot of folks asking for money at the same time. End of year and Giving Tuesday. Many organizations are participating, as you saw in the early graphs. Research and charities also spikes around this time. And as the worldwide giving event, it's one of the few times where people think about a portfolio of giving. On average, donors tend to give about 4.5 different organizations per year, and frequently many of these gifts will happen on Giving Tuesday or around end of year. You can see, by the way, that this varies a little bit by, quite interestingly, by demographic. And so younger generations tend to have more of a focus on fewer organizations. Silent generation tends to spread things out, and it just goes right down with age. Now, let's also add that this isn't just the year you were born. As we go up to the right, you have more disposable income. Silent generation also, by the way, tends to respond better to direct mail. And so this sort of like tons of direct mail that they're getting may be more effective than it is for, say, millennials. Apologies to Gen Z, who's not yet showing up in these graphs. Other things to note, when we think about high visibility, you've got built-in marketing, right? The idea that, hey, you should give today is coming at me from 100 directions. Donors are cruising Giving Tuesday on social networks. There's a lot of templates, there's logos, et cetera. People are predisposed to give because you're hearing about this from all sides. Huge opportunity to boost your brand and talk about your work. Big opportunity to be found or attract new donors. This is the moment where people are most receptive to learn about new ways to give. So that's a really important takeaway, right? Giving Tuesday, around Giving Tuesday, and before end of year, this is the moment where people are saying, oh, I'm open to learning, not just about your organization, but about giving as a concept. So let's talk about some giving day strategies, right? The first one, as we chat sometimes about, is making sure that we're ready for bigger gifts. If you are going to get 100 gifts this year, or 1,000 gifts, but we'll keep it, 100, and you can move 10, 20 of those into non-cash giving, you may have doubled your overall giving goals, right? Really shift. These non-cash centric giving days, like Make a Will Month or Stock Monday, put these gifts in the front and center, but they're also really good for getting people to give in other ways during giving days themselves. Research also shows, and this is really, really important, that donors show a strong preference for taking more than one action on Giving Tuesday. Non-cash giving or planned giving can be the next action for donors. This is really valuable. So Stock Monday is a good example. It often introduces the idea of giving stock. It primes donors to make a gift of stock on Giving Tuesday or in their end of year giving. Both of these are really important. And what we see is that the organizations, we'll talk about this more in a second, that educate donors early, then reap the benefits down the road as we get to Giving Tuesday and end of year. And that's a really big shift. The folks that can think a little bit ahead are suddenly generating significantly better outcomes than those that aren't. Sample email that you might use, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you'll have it in the deck. So basically, as you know, tomorrow is Giving Tuesday, one of the most important days of the year. We're trying to raise $1 million. But today is Stock Monday, and we're going to share a new type of gift for many of you that other folks are using, right? So we have this time-bound nature, and we have this social proof. If you want to make a gift like that, click here, et cetera, et cetera. So this can be really useful. We're going to share some more of the research on this in a second. So you really want to be ready for this. When you are doing your Giving Tuesday push already, you want to make sure that you're driving people to a page where they can see other types of giving, because again, these gifts are going to be in many cases 100 times larger, in some cases 1,000 times larger. So make sure that your website pages are updated with non-cash giving options that you accept. And you might not accept all of these, that's okay. Make sure that you're highlighting the ones that you do accept. You want a form on these pages to collect donor info, et cetera, in terms of instructions for donors and things like that. Very important for stocks and QCDs, so you don't end up with anonymous gifts, which are a huge pain for your whole team. And these should really be on your donate page. So we say this a lot, but the organizations that are doing this are seeing just radically better results than the organizations that only have this sort of box that says 25, 50, 100, 200, right? Because you're really telling the donor, oh, most people give $100, click here. Remember, social proof is super important in this stuff. So if you're telling people to give $80 in cash, they'll give you $80 in cash, which is better than $0 in cash, but it pales in comparison to the $8,000 stock gift that the same person might give you. Southern Poverty Law Center does a great job here. So this is the top part of their donate page. And we share it sometimes because really they're doing best in class work over here. You can see, by the way, they've linked to all these different types of gifts as a way to make sure they're getting really big gifts. In the weeks leading up to these key giving days, and this, by the way, is going to be true if you have a class day in May, or you have an annual giving day in April, or whatever it might be. It's a really good chance to educate folks on how to, for any of their giving. This means tax advantage gifts like stock or QCDs or donor advised funds or crypto. But before we move on to the next slides, I just want to note that particularly for things like Giving Tuesday or end of year giving, we know that your donors are giving to multiple places, and that's a good thing. So when you can share tips in this idea of for any of your giving, it really puts you in this close relationship with the donors, and that builds a really strong bond. So for instance, if you are Worcester College, which Hallie was sharing with us earlier, alum from Worcester College is probably also giving to their local nature conservancy or land trust. They're probably also giving to their church or synagogue or house of worship, right? They may also be giving to their kids' school. And if you can be the person who's leading on shaping all of their giving, that will create a really strong bond with you and the donor. 2 weeks ago, right after our last webinar, we had an innovation summit for all of our partners. And we had my colleague Bree and others just did an amazing job highlighting some of the research and the thoughtfulness that has gone over the last 6 months and year. And I want to share 3 slides that Bree shared to sort of understand some of the research we're seeing around stock giving and prepping for this. So these are all slides from that innovation summit around unlocking more stock gifts during end of year giving season. So super important for our partners, but also important for everybody else. What we saw is that a lot of website visits, meaning people that were looking at the stock tool or looking at information about giving stock, happened well before end of year giving, even though most of the giving happens later. And so what happens is people are learning about this. They're not moving on it immediately, but it's really filed in the back of their heads, so then they can take action later on. What it meant is that organizations that participated in Stock Monday, which was really just educating folks as opposed to generating a ton of gifts initially, had nearly a 5 times increase in overall giving, even though most of that increase happened down the road. And so what we're really seeing is this need for early education, right, in advance of the activation that's bound to happen later with your donors, is a really powerful mechanic. We also see that this becomes increasingly important in an era of inflation, which we are certainly in, right? So food prices are up 10%. Recently, we came down from $5 a gallon. Interest rates are the highest since '94. 58% of the country believes we're in a recession. And what it means is that there are two things happening at the same time. One, donors have less cash that is handy. And two, the cash that they might give you, because $100 sort of feels the same to me as it did 3 years ago, even though it buys less, when you're getting cash, it's actually worth less than it used to be. And so there's this really big imperative to shift. Now, some people say, well, the stock market's down over the last few weeks. And that is true. But when you look at it over the last 5 years or so, you see almost 50% increase. And so most of your donors are going to have some appreciated assets here. And this is a really, really good time, right? The sort of pre-Giving Tuesday, pre-end of year giving, this is your moment to educate folks, turn the dial on how they're giving, and then look to see gifts that are 10 or 50 or 100 times larger, okay? So really interesting data there. And what we suggested to our partners and are working with a bunch of those folks to do is say, great, we're going to design one email that's based on all of our best-in-class learnings that is going to get sent in September, right? Way before end of year giving, probably not competing with other fundraising because it's September. And we're going to send one of these, and it's going to educate donors on stock giving. And what it's going to do is, in our research, as much as triple end of year stock giving by building awareness and education, driving traffic, and then that is going to, down the road, lead to bigger gifts. So really interesting stuff here. Just a sort of small piece. And thank you to everyone on the call, by the way, who participated in that innovation summit. It was really, really powerful and actually a lot of fun. Okay, so that's a little bit on real-time giving. The third tip is for those of you that have missed Make a Well Month, or those of you that have saw big success in Make a Well Month, going big on what we call NEPA, which is National Estate Planning Awareness Week. Remember, Congress made this in 2008, so it's a national event. Really good time to drive on planned giving before year-end stuff focuses on real-time gifts. Last year, we saw more than 14 million in bequests in just 1 week. We expect actually significantly higher this year. And what this means is we're just emailing all of our supporters. Now, historically, planned giving is seen as sort of the very top of the donor pyramid, but estate planning is a universal need, right? More than any other type of giving. And so sometimes people say, okay, well, our planned gifts only come from the folks who have been giving 20 years in a row or the wealthiest. And that turns out to be pretty false, right? Anyone can make a bequest and have an impact for decades. It doesn't affect me financially today at all. And you have universal needs for estate plans. In fact, much more than loyalty, things like number of family attachments play a key role here. Excuse me. All right, strategy 4. We're upping our pre and post Giving Tuesday game. So I talked a little bit about some of this pre-learning, but the scope of Giving Tuesday is expanding. And there's a lot of noise here. We talked about this as one of the main challenges. So it's hard to stand out. But you start to see, talks about giving, et cetera, really going up and online mentions over the course of the year pretty steadily, and then sharply increasing towards the end of the year. So how do we break through this? Particularly for our biggest donors, major gift prospects, previous donors, at least in a month in advance, you want to check in without asking for gifts. And this way you will be the first people that they think of on Giving Tuesday. These goals should be strengthen the relationship, learn more about what they're interested in, and usually sort of bridge towards a discussion about some different ways to give that might be more powerful. For emails or phone calls, think about this as a 2-part strategy, right? First one is check in how they're doing, update them on your impact, ask if you can follow up specific options to get involved on Giving Tuesday. And a really good phrase here is to include non-monetary ways, right? Because you don't want your donors to feel like they're just an ATM. On the second point, let them know about several ways they can help, including non-cash donations. Think about volunteering or other things in this non-monetary way, and planned gifts, right? So we want all of these to be on the table. When we include non-monetary options, donors will be listening harder than if they were, they sort of feel like they're just being sold to or asked for money. So this is a really good sort of small tip, adding, we love when we can add one sentence and have really big increases without any more work. Day after Giving Tuesday, for instance, send thank you emails. A really good thing in thank you emails beyond is to report on how folks made a difference, oftentimes what the money might go to, but also to include planned giving as another way to make a big impact. Remember, Giving Tuesday donors have reported that they really want to get involved in multiple ways. And planned giving is a great add-on to real-time giving at this. So a small sample email that you could follow up with. And thank you so much for your gift. As you know, it's Giving Tuesday. We raised over $50,000 to feed our rescue puppies. We couldn't have done it without you. I also want to share one more way that many are choosing to have an impact, making a gift in your will. Cost you nothing now, powerful commitment, et cetera, et cetera. This is a really great follow-up. And it's not help us, right? It's you make, our job as fundraisers is to help you make an impact. And this tends to be quite useful because people have already established that, yes, this is a cause that matters to me in close proximity. And so this can be a really useful piece here. Make a Will Month 2023. It's never too early to think about next August. Remember that interest in making a will actually spikes from August to October. Fall tends to be the season for estate planning. So a couple of big tips. Make sure that folks know they need a will. Make it easy and free as much as possible to make one. And then emphasize the lasting impact of planned gifts for both you and your donors, right? We really want to have this idea of symbolic immortality, right? We're living long beyond our lifetimes with the impact that we're about to have. Okay, a couple more things to note here. We already mentioned how big the gifts were here. And the way that that success happened is a mix of resource framing and social proof. Give supporters a free resource that thousands of other people have used to make a gift. You may want to mention that people are welcome to make a gift, but they don't have to. And then you say it in what we call dedicated emails, which this is really done well when it's just about one thing. It's hard for planned giving to be one of 19 options in a newsletter. That doesn't really work. And last year, 85% of all gifts were just from these dedicated standalone emails, right? So that's where the magic happens. Everything else is nice to have on top of that. Here's a sample. We won't go through it now because we want to make sure we get some time for questions, but you can see it as well. I'll be there. And then 6, right? We're really mastering the use of good stress. We know deadlines are important motivators, but there are some things to keep in mind. Deadline must be authentic and realistic. The ask is easy and the deadline is urgent. And then you want to share your goals and progress along the way. When you achieve your goal, you really want to share it for that endorphin payoff, right? People love collective success. This is why after, X team wins the Stanley Cup, there's going to be parties in the streets, right? People love doing things together and celebrating it, and make sure that you're rewarding your donors who gave with that endorphin payoff. And then last strategy, we won't talk about this much, but I hope that it inspires some of your thinking for your own giving days on top of the big stuff that we talked about. So for things like anniversaries or birthdays, right, of your founder, of the founding of the organization, of a really big event, whether it's cause related, it's Earth Day or something else, and that's really particularly important to you. It's the founding of your legacy society or something else. But all these things, right, they can be really meaningful to connect for your supporters. And a lot of the lessons that we talked about here deeply apply here. So it varies a bit on your type of organization. But think about where you want to grow your fundraising, how you want to frame it. Other things to think about is, there'll be less of the sort of ambient noise around giving, but also more space. And so you might want to think about, where are the gaps in your fundraising calendar? Is there a slower part of fundraising season? Maybe it's the spring, right? A lot of the things we talked about are in the second half of the year. Is there something in April or February or March that could really benefit from a giving day? This sort of giving day effort, it doesn't even have to be an event or anything. It can just be, something we name as a really important time. And setting participation goals or other things like that can be quite useful. So that's a whole bunch on giving days. Some couple things I wanted to share around Make a Will Month performance. We already shared about this, but hoping to hit $500 million this month. Really excited to be working alongside hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits doing this. Pretty cool. And then one interesting thing, because I love sharing when people are doing innovative stuff. We work with a health nonprofit that said, yeah, this is great. We love it for our donors. We love it for our donors, but also we've got a big staff, right? And they do a bunch of health work. And so they emailed out to their employees in the health system In 15 days, they had 435 of their employees start their estate plans, more than 100 complete them, and 12 new bequests to the organization. So you simultaneously made all of the employees better off while generating more long-term giving. This was only in one email. And they had an integrated mention in their employee newsletter, put it on their staff benefits site, right? Not their staff responsibility site, but the benefits site. And then they put a QR code up in some employee areas. So pretty simple. Let's call it, a half day of work for one person, and suddenly 12 new planned gifts and a lot of good feeling from employees. Pretty cool to see. So shout out to those groups. Other thing that was really fun to see is someone got a note about Make a Will Month and just responded with both making their will and sending a check. This is the note. It says, thank you for making this available to me. It was a great relief to get it done. P.S. Here's a couple $100 check. So that was super cool to see. Okay, so we're about to wrap up and get to questions. A couple of resources that I wanted to share. First things first, we are going to drop our survey in the chat right now. Thank you, June. Spot on with timing. And we'd love to give many of you this book. So as you recall from the top of the hour, getting really good at negotiating is not, by the way, brass knuckle tactics, right? You sort of figure out what other people want, what you want, and how you can get the most for everybody. One of the best things you can do for your whole life. And so that's why we're delighted to give away this book. Maggie Neal is an incredible expert. And so delighted to share that. Just make a note in the survey if you like it. Other things, we've developed a whole Giving Tuesday toolkit, some templates, some strategy documents. These are really good things to help get your planning going if you haven't already. And we'll just make a note in the survey if that's helpful to you. And we put a lot of work into that. And then not this Thursday, and I guess 2 Thursdays from now because so many folks are on vacation, but a lot of people have been asking about what we call feature ships. And feature ships are, the freewill.com tool is now the #1 estate planning tool in America, right? Hundreds of thousands of people every year. And so a lot of people have been asking about, hey, how do we get featured in the greater New York City area, in the state of Nebraska, across the whole United States? What does that look like? What does that sort of partnership look like? And what is it good for? What is it not good for? But we're really looking at a couple $2 billion being allocated every year through this. And so my friend and colleague, Chris, and I, we're going to sit down and do a 30-minute session on Thursday, the 8th. So this is about 2 weeks away, I think, to really walk through what these feature ships are, what they're not, how to use them, who they're good for. And for those of you that are thinking about accelerating planned giving, this is honestly the sort of most effective fundraising tool we've seen. So some really interesting stuff. We really try to avoid getting into the FreeWill products on these calls so we can dive in on the cool, interesting academic research, the applications, the tips and tricks and stuff. But if you'd like to join us, it'll be a fun half hour. And so you can join Chris and me and just make a note in this survey as well. But there's some really cool opportunities for folks there. And then also, if you're interested in talking with our wonderful team to just sort of hear more about the planned giving tools, crypto giving, stock giving, et cetera, just let us know. And then also, just to be clear, we tend to be a good fit for organizations that are a little bit on the larger side, so $1 million plus, all the way up to, some of our partners are $1 billion plus in annual revenue, or 5K email supporters. That's because that's sort of generally the size that tends to work here. And so just naming that across the board. You can make a note of the survey. You can also always go to freewill.com/nonprofits. We also tend to have a bunch of our tools and templates there. So that's a bit more. All right. So great. We've seen some folks. Great. Let me actually, oops, sorry, doing this wrong here. Looks like the survey link hasn't come here. So I'm going to copy it, go back to our giving days, and I'm going to paste it in the chat right now for everybody. So let's see if this works. All right, so I have just pasted the survey in the chat. If you don't mind, take a moment to click that. I will take the moment if you take a minute to fill out the survey, it's super helpful to us. That will give me a chance to read some of your questions, and then we'll come back and address them in about 30 seconds. All right, so we have some really good questions here. A couple of themes. I'm not going to answer all of them because we don't have that much time. Is there any data that suggests giving days actually increase giving, as opposed to just changing the day that gifts are made? Ken, we really do see this in the research, that this sort of urgency get folks off the sidelines in a way they might not give otherwise. And I think the new donor data tends to be really valuable here, right? People that have basically never given and that are moved by Giving Tuesday because of the ambience and all the noise in a really good way. So we do see that it's likely to increase overall giving. Kim asks, and there's a couple questions here. Do folks see softness in stock giving due to market volatility, Kim? And, I think the answer is no. There are a couple of thoughts here. One is you actually see some softness in cash giving as people have less disposable income. And as I mentioned, that cash is actually worth less than it is because people's mind isn't re-anchoring every few months with inflation and increasing their giving accordingly. So really important to move for non-cash giving there. The other thing is that the news, someone else mentioned that they're ED, skeptical because of news reports of stock market. And the way the news talks about the stock market is somewhat unfortunate because it overstates losses. And what I mean by that is it will say something like, the stock market is down 11% from February's high. And what they really mean is stocks are down 11% from a single instant in February where stocks hit an all-time peak. Now, what they don't say is that most people didn't buy their stocks at that one instance in February. And instead, if you go back over the last 2 years, over the last 5 years, certainly over the last 10 and 20, you see massive increases across the board in virtually all indices. And so the real question is, do you think you have donors with appreciated assets? And the answer is almost certainly yes. Most of your donors are going to have a good number of appreciated assets. And in a recession, or in a moment where people have less cash, they're more attuned to better ways to give. And so we didn't talk about this much, but because when you give appreciated assets, you get usually a full income tax deduction and you avoid capital gains taxes, you tend to be saving a lot more on taxes than if you just give cash. And so a way to think about this is, are people looking to save more than usual? And the answer there is almost certainly yes. And so that's something you might want to bring back to your ED. Much of the focus is on new and existing donors. Can you speak a little bit about how this impacts lapsed donors, the re-engagement factor? Chandler, that's a great question. So Chandler, at some point you can think about lapsed donors as new donors. But another way to do is be really specific with those folks. And so, one way to think about this is you might contact someone who's been giving to your land trust. And maybe they gave in 08, 09, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 18, and then haven't given since. One thing to note is, we saw on our records that you've given a lot over the years, but it's been a little while. A lot of people are participating in Giving Tuesday. We love to encourage you to welcome you back, and maybe you'd be interested in a small gift to be part of the community that's giving back here, right? So now we're giving specific reason to get back off the sidelines. We're giving social proof. We're giving some specificity. And maybe you want to think about a lower bar to welcome those folks back in. And once they re-engage, you can then begin to get more and more gifts. So it's a really good question. A lot of folks, a lot of organizations with any meaningful length of time in existence have a lot of lapsed donors, and really going out and generating that as well. All right, so we have relatively little time. So maybe I'll ask one more. So this is a really good question from Lisa. Over the past few years, we've spoken of donors as investors and shown the impact of their gift. Does this still work? Does the investor language make people feel involved, or is it an impersonal turnoff? Lisa, that's a great question. It depends on your core audience. I think the core piece is, sometimes we do a training on effective writing. And the big piece in the effective writing that really matters is what we call the impact gap. So you say, this is the current situation. If we can get sufficient giving from you or from multiple people, we can do this, and that will result in this outcome. And so if you can go back and say, hey, you made this possible, right? There were 1,000 people who were otherwise going to go hungry. And over the course of the last year, you and other people contributed to feed all those families. And now they're better off for X, Y, and Z reason. That is the stuff that's really magic for donor, right? Things that are newly possible because of my activity that weren't otherwise possible. And that's, I think, the most important frame, whether you talk about that as investment or anything else, but really not just sort of this impersonal, you gave us money and we later did things, but really this stuff would not have happened without your donors. It also wouldn't have happened, by the way, without all of your hard work. But that's really the important message to convey as we thank people. Not just thank you for making this possible, but really reminding people it would not have happened without them. And imagining that sort of worse world and contrasting it with the better outcomes that they had is really important. So let's wrap up there. I know folks have to get other meetings. Just wanted to say again, an enormous thank you to you all for taking an hour with us to really learn, to hopefully improve some of your strategies, to help your organization, ideally to advance your career as well. It's honestly such a blessing for us to be able to gather with you every few weeks or so. Before I go, I should note that we'll do a session in 2 more weeks. And the next session is on crypto giving and NFT giving, which we get a lot of questions about. And one of the things we really try to do is explain it to folks in 5th or 8th grade language, because a lot of this stuff has a lot of jargon, but isn't that complicated at the end of the day. And so we really try to do our best to break it down and share that. So I would love to see you in 2 weeks if that's useful. If not, feel free to skip it. And generally just have a wonderful Labor Day. And as we wrap up summer, which feels like it ended too quickly. So huge thank you again, and talk to many of you all very soon.